Hey, Link here. Thanks for joining me for episode 117, where I speak of Sally Beaumont. In this episode, we talk about things like her favorite games, how she got into voice acting, some words of encouragement, main characters versus secondary characters, her life outside of gaming, and some lightning round questions. Before we get started, don't forget there are links in the episode description that you can follow to learn more about Sally as well as the podcast. Also, don't forget to like and share the episode, and without further ado, enjoy episode 117. Hi, and welcome to the Red Tunic Podcast, a podcast where I look to rediscover what makes gaming fun and enjoyable by having positive conversations with those related to the industry. My name is Link, and today I'm joined by Sally Beaumont, voice actress who has contributed to projects like the recently released Old Skies by Wadjet Eye Games and the upcoming Heartspell Horizon Academy. Hi, Sally, how are you doing today?
I'm great, thank you. Hi. Thanks for having me on.
Sally, thank you so much for being here. I really, I'm always appreciative when people make time for me. But also I'm happy that we were able to work this out just because you are um, in in Europe. You're on the other side of the world for me. That might be a bit of a leap to say the other side. However, you're across the pond, I think is the
Across
more
the
appropriate
pond.
term. So
Yeah.
there is definitely a time difference. So thank you so much for working this out with me and being here. I'm happy that you're here. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you.
Now, Sally, before we get started, though, I am wondering if you would mind giving me and anyone listening a little bit, like an intro, a little bit of who you are, or what you do, like the elevator pitch to like who you are, the things you feel people should be just most aware of, if that makes sense.
Oh, goodness. If this is the first time you're encountering me, welcome. Hi. I'm Sally Beaumont. I'm a voice actor and game writer, and you would probably recognize me from the recently launched Old Skies, where I play the rather sarcastic protagonist. But I'm also a regular NPC in a big swathe of mainly adventure games. And I have rather shot myself in the foot there because I sound so different in all of them, no one connects that it's me. Uh, I also did some writing in Old Skies and on Venture to the Vile and Forgotten Fields and The Will of Arthur Flabbington and a few others. So I tend to veer towards historical writing, comedy writing. I like turning my hand to anything, really. Uh, yeah, I think it's a long elevator ride, right? Tall building.
It's as long as you want it to be, in all in all honesty. But no, thank you for that, and that is there is something I wanted to ask about because you had mentioned this before we before we started recording was
Mm.
that a lot of in the past you have done a lot of like NPC work, and I'm wondering uh besides the obvious, what's the difference for your approach for doing like a main character or a more um a more involved character, I guess, as opposed to an NPC. I know I don't like I know that NPCs can have some more words. Anyway,
Mm.
sorry. I think you know what I'm asking. I think you'll
I do.
I think you can go with it easier than I can try and dig a grave here.
Don't worry about it. I think there's somehow this idea that maybe an NPC or a smaller role, which I think is what you're dancing around, is somehow less worthy, less interesting, less complicated. And you know what they say: there are no small parts, only small actors. And possibly small paychecks. But my approach to this is parts of it are exactly the same and parts of it vary wildly. And I've studied quite a wide range of different types of acting technique, and I tend to kind of reach into my toolbox, as it were, and take out the thing that I think works best for a particular type of role. So for example, in something like uh, my mind's gone completely blank. I'm sorry about this. It's something like Lord Winklebottom Investigates. There's some very broad characters in that. And the developer sent me a recording of a sheep screaming a bit like a person and said, "Can you do this?" And then do the rest of the character with that voice. And so that's not a very intellectual way into a character, but it's certainly a way in that you can use the sound, the way that sound works, to inform the kind of character that you're making. And then other times when you're doing something a lot bigger, so for example, when I was playing Fear in Old Skies, you don't think about the sound so much as the person underneath, and that's when you start to lean on things like researching your character by looking through the script, working out what she says about herself, what others say about her. You become a little bit of a detective, that you're trying to get to know this person. And as the emotions, as the personality traits emerge, the way that that character sounds sort of happens naturally. That I don't think I ever sat down and thought, what do I want this woman to specifically sound like? And actually, if you've played the game, she's a little bit like Five Voices in a Trench Coat, because she's constantly changing her voice to fit weird and wonderful situations. And so I kind of let go of the sound of her and made sure that the emotion was real underneath. So you can see those are two quite separate approaches. And sometimes I'll come across an NPC and I'll use the detective approach and be very detailed. And, sometimes they just want me to shout really loud in a weird accent, and that's fine too. I love all of them.
So thank you for that. I'm trying. I think the best way to phrase this, I think this is the proper way to phrase this, but that is some wild direction to send someone a sheep screaming and going, "Can you do something like this as a character?"
That's just a Tuesday for me. Seriously.
I don't doubt you, but that's just a wild bit of direction, and I'm happy to know that that is sometimes just the case of it, because it's just it's I I need to prove I am someone who really enjoys absurdity, and the
Yes.
absurdity of going, this is our direction for the character, and it's just a screaming sheep. I love it. I'm happy to know that such a thing exists, because it's so wonderfully absurd. So thank you for sharing that. I'm happy that exists. That's all I kept thinking when you were sharing everything. Everything you were sharing was was like very informative. It was very nice to know that you go more from the emotion and like the mindset of the character, not a voice, and kind of letting that voice, or who you think they are, and your or interpretation of who they are, come out that way. So you're sharing all this. I'm like, this is all really interesting, and the other side of me is like screaming sheep, screaming sheep. That's just it. So thank you for everything you said. But as bad as to say, especially the screaming sheep. That's the absurd
Well,
part of me loves that.
I have a strong sense of the absurd, and I couldn't do this work without a sense of the absurd. But I think actually having that, I always say I don't embarrass easily, because I do things before I've had a chance to think about them, which is how you get into terrible scrapes, but it's good acting. And that sense of silliness, I like silliness, and I don't think that can undermine really smart stuff. I think there's always space for a bit of silliness somewhere. But that openness, that rawness, and that comes from a background in improvisation, in clowning, all this stuff that you would think, that's not really voice acting. How is clowning voice acting? It's all acting. Having that sort of openness and silliness available to me helps me do all of the different things that I do, because there's this sort of element of imagination that you have. I'm sitting in a beige booth, which is where I do most of my work, and depending on the day, it's a spaceship, it's a city, it's all these other settings because of my imagination. And I think if I stopped to think about how silly that is, I wouldn't be able to do this. So I just lean into the silliness of it. It's very freeing, I think. And I think having just played for 3 years a time traveller who goes to all sorts of different times and does all sorts of really absurd stuff, there is so much comedy in Old Skies for a quite a serious dramatic game, but there's so much silliness in it where I just have to go, okay, I guess we're doing this, and just go with it, both as an actor and as a character. I think a sense of the absurd, particularly for adventure games, is incredibly helpful.
So thank you for sharing that. I'm trying to think of the right way to phrase this, and it's the the going into it with like the mindset of just sort of giving into the process and letting go of what I would say are preconceived notions of like controlling it. And like you said, sometimes your beige box is a spaceship. Sometimes it could be like a race car or what have you, right? Like being able to let go of what it is and just sort of accept, the silliness, as you put it. I thank you for that. That's I think that's like a wonderful outlook or way to approach it for doing any kind of voice, things or acting in general, right? But no, thank you, because I think that's just wonderful like approach, so or outlook or what have you. So thank you so much for that. It's I did not expect you to say something that was going to hit me across the face in such a way, but thank you.
Well, it's kind of being able to appreciate the silliness of life as well is a very freeing thing. So I think, I think particularly comedy gets looked down on as being trivial, and it's far from it. I think if you can look at life and all of the sometimes dreadful things that it throws at you and still find something humorous, even if that's really dark humour, and a lot of my humour is quite dark. I mean, what are we doing if we can't find a bit of silliness once in a while?
Yes, I get, yes, that's also a very good point. And Sally, not to change the subject, not to try and maybe they will be related. I'm not entirely certain. However, I am curious, like how did you get into doing voice acting? Like what made you like what led to you being in this field?
I It kind of feels like I was really always supposed to do this, and that sounds kind of trite, but I'd been mucking around with recording myself since I was a tiny child, and just sort of always gravitated towards being silly and acting and doing all the performy sort of things. And I went to university and studied drama, which was terrific because I got to try all sorts of different things. So I got to do acting, I got to train in a recording studio, which I use daily now, and I got to train as a playwright, which informed a lot of my game writing later on. It informed a lot of my game writing later on, and yeah, it sort of snuck up on me that all these different pieces, the acting, the recording, the writing, these could all work together and be an actual job. Um, I'd sort of noticed that voiceover work got paid a lot better than acting work, which is weird, but that is the case. And I can remember my first ever voiceover job was a casting where they were looking for a middle-aged man to do an educational style video for an art installation. And I, with all the kind of confidence of youth, emailed them and said, no, you don't need a middle-aged man, you need me. Oh, to be like that ever again, my goodness. And I'd been volunteering at the Open University, which is a distance learning organisation in the UK. And I'd just been volunteering to record all their educational materials, which is a requirement for accessibility, which is awesome. And I just told them I'd been doing that, and they said, okay, we're going to call you, do your Open University voice. And I don't know what I did, because there is no Open University voice. I just bluffed very hard. Again, this probably doesn't make me sound very professional, but, you know, I took a leap. And I'm so, so glad that I did, because I was thoroughly in love as soon as I did that. And I did little bits of games. I did a tiny little game for a Polish company called Burn, and the company turned out to be Teon Games, and I really wish I'd stayed in touch with them, because of course all the Terminator games and so on, oops, networking fail. But about 10 years ago, I did an adventure game that kind of made me aware of adventure games still existing, because I'd played them as a child and absolutely loved them. And yeah, I'd always been kind of obsessed with Guybrush Threepwood's voice, and the fact that that is a real person and that is a real job is kind of exciting. And so I got more and more involved in adventure games, and kind of found my people, really, and just kind of found that my particular brand of silliness was apparently very useful for a lot of adventure games. And after a few years of doing that, and working with the dialogue so much, and having a writing background, I really started to think, wait, I can write these. I can do this as well. And started to very slowly kind of go to talks by my writer friends and read books, and kind of gradually sidle my way up to writing. And I think I did my first project in 2019, and I'm really glad I did, because obviously 2020, nobody's going anywhere, but I can write. So started working on games, and I mainly work in adventure games. I do occasionally spread out into Metroidvanias when I'm feeling flamboyant. Uh, but yeah, that it sounds a bit sort of circuitous, and at times I sort of feel like I wish that I could have got here a little bit faster. But the whole point is the story, right? That you live your life and you pick up all these skills and experiences, and that's what makes you able to do it now. And you know, if maybe I'd had a shot at the stuff I'm doing now a long time ago, I wouldn't have been ready. Or I would have had a different skill set. So I just try and like enjoy where I am now. And it's kind of looking at it on paper, I'm like, of course that was going to happen. Look at how your career very cleverly covers all these interesting different bases, and how they all come together. And nobody really works like that. But I'm really glad that I was able to kind of bring all the different skills together, because I do really love what I do. I'm very lucky.
So, thank you for sharing all, the I say all of that. I don't mean that, I know that might have a bit of a negative connotation, but no, thank you for sharing all that, because it's interesting, the like the how, like the all of the dots that connected to get you here, right? Um I particularly like the emailing what I assume would be like a casting director or what have you, and be like, look, I know you meant well, but I think what you want is me. And bluffing your way into that, and at the very least, from the sounds of it, getting an interview. I put interview in air quotes, because I'm not overly familiar if that's the right terminology here. But like, I just the everything is fantastic to hear. I actually know someone that did a similar thing when they got a job rejection. They were, the email came in, they're like, "Hey, we're gonna go another direction." They replied back with, "No, I think you sent this to the wrong person. I think you meant to send me the 'Hey, we're moving you forward' email." And they
Wow.
were they were so caught off guard by it. I don't know if they were impressed by it or what, but they did the same thing that you had where they went, okay, let's see where this goes. Like you rolled the dice, you rolled well. Let's go with this gamble. Um, but like thank you for sharing everything. It's wonderful. It's fantastic.
I'm
And like
I'm now
I
worried I'm going to get lots of emails like that sent to me because I am an occasional casting director as well, and actors can become very pushy. And I had one trying to convince me that he could do a particular accent, and he could not. He just included the accent in the file name, and it's my accent. And we had this ongoing conversation. It's You're not doing it because it's my accent, so I know you're not doing it. And the kind of like the there's confidence and then there's whatever that was. So that's why I'm kind of cringing. I think because it was such a small scale thing, and I spotted that the reason that they wanted a middle aged man is because they wanted to confer a kind of gravitas on the project. So this is like the note under the note. When you see a casting, you have to understand not just what they're asking for, but why they're asking for that. And sometimes you give them what they want, and sometimes you also give them what they need that they didn't realise about. So when I was talking to that client, they'd immediately decided, oh, we want, an older sounding man with a deep voice. I'm sure they were thinking about David Attenborough, for example. And when I dug into the project, it was an art installation, and it was about the kind of banality of everyday life. And I said, well, what you could do by using somebody with a voice like mine is I can do a kind of gravitas for you, but because all the other films of this type are voiced by middle-aged men, you're immediately going to stand out. Which, in retrospect, that was very smart. And so it's not just about saying, no, you can't reject me. I will have this job. It's more just kind of going, I know you would like this, but have you considered this other possible thing? I think that's probably the tame version that I do now. I always do what they're asking for, but sometimes it's worth giving them a bit of a wild card sometimes.
So thank you. Yes, I understand what you're saying, and you're right. Uh, don't email back to casting directors with no, you're wrong. You want me. Have an idea about what your pitch is going to be, right? Um, Now I am also curious because
Mm,
you actually said a lot of things that could be taken this way.
mm.
So by all means, if you just want to say one of the things you had already said, um, perfectly valid, but like, do you have any words of encouragement for others or like your past self or however you'd like to interpret that?
I mean, I always feel a little cautious about giving advice because when I started my voice acting career, we were still using sometimes paper newsletters, and to get a reel to somebody, you could burn it onto a CD and post it to them. So the landscape is a little different now. So I try not to sort of say, oh, it's obvious, just do X, Y, and Z, because the way that I started is not the way that one would start now. I would say if you want to be a voice actor, uh, it's less about your voice than it is about your acting ability. And if you really want just one part of the acting ability, and really you should be, studying acting as much as possible, look at improvisation. Look at how to be spontaneous in the moment, because you may find yourself in a recording session where the script is being written in front of you. You may find yourself in a session where they can't give you the script until the session. You've got to be loose. You cannot be like, okay, thanks for the script. I'll be back in 4 hours after I have applied my careful method to. You can't do that. You've got to crack on. And if that sounds terrifying, it is, but you have to have the tools to approach it, and that's where your acting skills, your improvisation skills come in. it's less about kind of being able to do funny voices or impressions. There's not actually that huge a market for that, but lots of people sort of find their way in through that. In terms of game writing, at the moment, it's a really tough time to be a game writer. Huge amounts of layoffs in narrative departments. I think I saw the statistic that there's about 700 applications to every one writing job, which, as someone applying to writing jobs, is disheartening. But again, the writing is the thing. Go and look at films, plays. Plays are very helpful for games, particularly things like promenade productions. They're very helpful. And spend lots of time listening to how other people speak, particularly if you're going to be writing for voice acting. Haha, you see the crossover. And just keep writing. Writing is one of those things where the more you do, the more you have. And that's creativity all over. If you start, hoarding it and only saving it for best, and I'm only going to write when I'm working or when I'm doing my portfolio or just on these things, it can really dry up quite quickly. I'm not an exponent of writing every single day. That's just not practical for me in my life. But to stay creative is probably the key. I have one particular friend. She knows who she is, and she will sometimes just fling a title at me. I'll just get a text message with a title in it, and she'll go, "What would this be?" And there's just a part of my brain that will immediately go, "Ah, yes, it is a story of," and she just likes to provoke me in these ways to see what I'll do. But I really love that, and that kind of keeping that creativity and that playfulness. Like, this isn't for anything in particular. I'm just having some fun with this. And sometimes those really fun things turn into projects that you can do. Yeah, that was quite vague, but everyone seems to find their own way into both writing and voice acting. And I think it's probably most important to get involved in the communities and kind of listen to people that are more experienced, much more experienced than me. There's a lot of them that are really generous on Blue Sky, just talking about their craft, and just seeing how they conduct themselves when they're applying for castings or looking at writing jobs. You can pick up a lot just being in the community. So I'd recommend just kind of getting involved and watching.
So thank you for that. That's wonderful, like wonderful words of encouragement, wonderful advice. Just the getting involved and just keep doing it, keep working at it. I like the I like that your friend just flings titles at you and basically says, "What is this?" And it's on you now to say what is I so thank you. I appreciate the words of encouragement, the advice, what have you. I just particularly like uh the talking of being loose, being comfortable to just jump at it and to swing whether or not you hit, but to swing and be not scared to swing
Yeah,
is wonderful.
and swing
Um,
big sometimes, just to be really, really brave. Because
yes.
everything's digital now. If it was terrible, we all laugh and we do it again different, right? The stakes are really low in terms of your dignity. Just go for it, right?
you know, I don't know if and when I'll have a chance to use the stakes are really low for your dignity, but I assure you I'm going to use that one day. So thank you for that. For I I hope I look forward to the day I get to use that. Thank you so much. That's I wonderful, wonderful, wonderful term.
It's actually a reference to Singing in the Rain, which is one of my favourite films. And it's something that my whole family says to me when they hear, I'm doing some ridiculous job. There's this little bit towards the beginning where the Gene Kelly character says, "The important thing is dignity, always dignity." And then there's a montage of all the incredibly embarrassing, undignified things he has had to do to become the film star that he is. And it's just perfect. And just we do say to each other, dignity, always dignity whenever I'm doing something ridiculous.
So thank you for that. And I'm Sally, I am curious, and I don't,
Mm.
I suck at transitions. I say this every time because I'm horrible at it, so I might as well call it out. However, I am wondering, dignity or with or without dignity, do you have like any favorite games, and what is it about those games that might set them apart from others?
I think if I had to really come down on it, I would say my favourite is Curse of Monkey Island, which is slightly controversial in the adventure game community. The first two are supposed to be much better. I love Curse of Monkey Island, and of course, it is the first one to have voice acting, so no surprises there. Um, but it was something that I started to play as a teenager, and it just grabbed me. It is such a big world of very silly characters and very silly behaviours, and it's just so fleshed out and all absorbing that I get really lost in it. I can still sing some of the songs from it, which I won't do on here. I'll spare you that. But particularly Dominic Armato's performance as Guybrush Threepwood, I love coming back to it. Every time I replay it, I hear him do something that I hadn't remembered. He's just kind of endlessly exciting as a performer in that role. That you think, oh, he's just some kind of dorky trainee pirate. Why would that be exciting? But the way that he sort of moves between comedy and drama and all the different emotions that he goes through is it's so seamless. I do love that performance. But I love the art of Curse of Monkey Island. I love the music. I will sometimes listen to the music when I'm writing something else because I kind of want to get the same kind of vibe of, the open seas and all of the possibilities of, combining items in your inventory ad nauseum. Um, yeah, I love Curse of Monkey Island. I'm just thinking I'm due for a replay. I replay it every sort of 2 or 3 years because I have an atrocious memory, which is wonderful because I get to re-experience things over and over again. I think sort of slightly more recently, and it's very clearly inspired by is a game called Nelly Coutelot and the Foul Fleet, um, and it's about a woman who wants to save a lot of birds in a piratical fashion, and she just goes on this big adventure and meets extraordinary people, and all the things. It's just perfectly pitched comedy, and it's usually the game that I give people when they want to get into adventure games, or even if they've just not really played games at all, because it's such a warm, accessible game, and all the puzzles really make sense, which I really appreciate. Adventure games have a bit of a reputation for moon logic, and Nelly Coutelot does not do that, which I appreciate.
So thank you for sharing that. And quickly on the topic of, as you called it, moon logic.
Mm.
Yes, I I I grew up playing Sierra adventure
Mm.
games, or that's the pool I swam in, or what have you. And yes, the number of times a wall was hit because you used an item the wrong way, um,
Mm.
in a way that you thought would make perfect sense. Yes, I understand. I think anyone that's played older adventure games will
Mm.
understand the frustration with hitting a wall that goes, well, our game's only 6 hours, but guess what? You have to go back to the beginning because 4 hours ago you did this thing you shouldn't have, right?
Oh, I hate
Um,
that. I
um,
just hate that.
so I'm happy to hear that a more recent game does not do that to you or does not set you up to fail in such a way, because um it just wasn't as a child it wasn't fun.
Yes.
I can't speak to it as an adult because I haven't went back to them as an adult. However, I'm fairly confident that as an adult with less time than a child, I would not appreciate it now either.
Yes. And I think that's probably a big hallmark of more modern adventure games. Certainly, from the last 20 years, the idea of really getting stuck or, having to trek for 4 hours through the game to fix something that you couldn't possibly have known. I think those, I tend to call them quality of life things, those have thankfully changed. And I think I think the vast majority of adventure games you can't get stuck, which for a player like me who is decidedly mediocre, I really appreciate. I don't want to get stuck in a game. I want to continue mucking about and doing stuff. Um, and yeah, I think that's something that's changed, and I'm kind of surprised they aren't more popular, because the big thing that everyone always says when you talk about adventure games is, "Oh, I used to get stuck," and "Oh, I used to die all the time," and those sorts of things have actually kind of gone. So it's sort of it's becoming much more new player friendly. I'm surprised there aren't more people playing.
You know, I understand what you're saying, and like part of me, I've noticed over the last handful of years that they've have been getting more traction. I'm always
Mm.
happy to see that the genre seems to be healthy.
Mm.
I say healthy with the inflection just because I don't know in today's industry what constitutes healthy and doesn't constitute healthy, but there seems to be
Same,
games for it.
same.
And I'm always just happy to see that someone or that people are making these games. And admittedly, I always say I want to try and get back into them, but like the backlog is so huge. There are adventure games sitting in the backlog, and it's like
Yeah.
I'll get to these someday. I'll retire soon when I'm 60. That's like 20 years, right? I can make it.
Yeah,
Um,
and this is a really strong argument for shorter games. And again, adventure games tend to be shorter. You don't have to put in hundreds and hundreds of hours. And for me, I'm similar. I like to just sort of settle down and play for an evening. I don't want to spend hundreds and hundreds of hours on a game. Not that those are bad. It's just that's not the kind of player I am. So I really like, I'll settle down to a 6 hour adventure game and play it over a couple of evenings. That's lovely for me. And I think that's definitely an untapped market for people who think that maybe they can't invest that time in a game. But, they could, in the same way that they watch a TV show for a couple of episodes in an evening, they could play an adventure game that way.
Sally, thank you, Sally. That is a wonderful way to reframe approaching games like this, shorter games in general, but especially adventure games. And it made me remember when Telltale first started out, that
Mm,
is how I approached their games, is that it was, I'd give it about an hour a night when that would
mm,
be maybe how much time I would have invested in just watching some nonsense on TV or what have you. Um, and you reminded me of that. So thank you, because that's a wonderful way to refocus it. And probably a good way to approach it for myself for trying to maybe get into them or tackle the backlog of them that do exist uh, deep within the several Steam sales and humble bundles and whatever else I've acquired over the last 20 years since Steam, 20 plus years since
mm.
Steam has been doing what Steam does. But no, thank you, because that's yes, I think that's good. That's also there's some wonderful advice right there, just how to approach shorter games, because then you're not spending 100 days, you're spending a few evenings, and then you get to
Mm.
finish it and kind of walk away going, I did a
Yeah.
thing. You have that dopamine from actually finishing and completing something, right?
Yes. Yeah, I think there's this idea that a game is almost measured by the pound or measured by the hour. Like the more hours, the better this game is. And I think there's a real skill and I think a real market for a story that's told over 6, 10, 15 hours, told well. It's not padded out. It just tells what it wants to tell and then it finishes properly. And you actually get to that ending. You don't get tired or bored or whatever 3/4 of the way through and never quite know what happens. You get to see it all the way through. Yeah, I think there's from a writing perspective, it's exciting to do something contained. But yeah.
Yes, yes. As someone that has admittedly tried to play several, longer games, usually JRPGs, and you
Mm,
set it down you set it down after like a week or two of playing, and you have like 30 hours, and then you forget what you were doing. You're like, well,
mm.
I'm not about to put 30 more hours into figuring out what I was doing, right? So yes, that's wonderful. Yes, thank you again. I want to ask this because I feel it's important to ask, and I always feel remiss if I, almost forget to or what have you. But like outside of gaming, what is it
Mm.
that you do to enjoy? Like, what do you enjoy doing? What do you do to relax? And if putting an hour or two aside to try and work through an adventure game or a small game is one of those things, I'm definitely not going to throw some shade. However, I like to ask all the same.
No, I mean, I definitely, I love to unwind with an adventure game, but I am, I want to say, kind of obsessive. I'm a very involved gardener, which a lot of people seem to think is an old person hobby, and whatever. I absolutely love gardening. Uh, I'm more of a sort of flowers person, but I do a little bit of foods, a few tomatoes and potatoes usually. But I really love gardening that produces really beautiful flowers, but it also encourages wildlife. So I have a lot of birds that come to my garden, for example. I have a big bird bath and things, and I even really get excited when all the insects arrive that everybody hates. At the moment, my garden is full of wasps, which sounds awful, but they're fine. They're chill. They're not bothering me. They just want to hang out. um, but I really love to just have something practical that I can do at the end of the day when I've been working with my brain, and something that I can actually see the hard work pay off over time. Um, and I think it is the time element that's really exciting for me, because I can paint. I like to paint, and I sometimes compare gardening to painting a little bit, because it is it's about creating colour and decorating and that sort of thing, but you have to factor time into it, and I think that's quite an exciting thing to be standing in the garden in December and thinking about what you want to be flowering in April, in July, next October, and that gets quite exciting because it never lets you get stuck now. There's always something to do. There's always something to plan for. There's always something to look forward to. There's always just like something to be doing. At the moment, I have got an awful lot of seedlings that need to be pricked out into bigger pots, and that's a very meditative activity for me. I really enjoy that, and there's this satisfaction I get from just sitting in the garden and seeing a bee come down onto a flower and knowing that I sowed the seed and then I grew the plant and then I put the plant in the garden and then the plant was happy and it flowered and then the bee came down and like I did that. And it is sometimes working in games, it can sometimes be a bit hard to say I did that, for a lot of reasons, and it can sometimes feel a bit like, I don't know, you're pedaling your legs really hard and not going anywhere. And that's when I need to go outside and dig a little hole in the garden or something, prune a shrub, or just plant something, grow something. It sounds like a compulsion. I guess it kind of is. Once you've done it, you kind of get bitten by a bug, and then hopefully not literally. I have been bitten by a lot of bugs. Um, yeah, that's really what I do, and I think it's super important to have something that's completely disconnected from my work. Um, that I can just switch off that part of my brain. I love my work, but part of the reason I love my work is because I'm not doing it all of the time. Um, how can I tell you how much I miss you if you won't go away? Right? So it's a bit like that for games, that I'll have a very long day in the booth, and then I'll just want to go outside and kind of potter about with my secateurs and just see what's happening out there and what needs doing, and make some plans and look at the wasps. So many wasps.
So thank you for that. First off, I am shocked that you aren't having an issue with wasps, only because they are notoriously known for being pricks. That's I
Yes.
think like on the list of things that wasps are, like in at least the top three, be a prick is one of them. So
Yeah,
I'm
no, they have a rep. They really do. Um, but I mean, they're important in the ecosystem, and they help with pest control and pollination and all of that stuff. And they don't start getting really mean until the end of summer, and that's when I might have problems. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. But yeah, they just kind of hang out. It's it's very weird. I sound like the wasp lady. I'm like the Snow White of wasps. There we
so
go. That's not a sentence I thought I'd say. Um, yeah, a lot of people are quite kind of anti things like insects and things like spiders. I'm not really bothered by spiders. I'm always really pleased to see spiders in the garden because, again, part of the ecosystem. And a garden that doesn't have all of the weird and wonderful insects that want to be there is kind of sterile, and that's bad for plants, and it's bad for the world. And the thing is that once the wasps start getting really mean, I think that's when the birds come down and will probably eat them. And I like the birds, so I guess it all kind of works out. I don't know.
the circle of life or something
Yeah,
of that effect.
something like that. I mean,
Um,
I don't claim to be an expert, but an awful lot of the things that we're scared of outside are not actually as scary. I did once, trigger warning for lots of insects, I did once put my hand into a gardening glove that had turned into a giant nest for earwigs, and when I pulled my glove vertical, all the earwigs poured down my arm like a horror film or something. It was like Temple of Doom. It was like that. And I remember looking at it and just going, "Oh, hello, everyone." Just not being shocked. I think it's desensitized me just being out there. They're fine. They're not going to do me any harm. I just wish I hadn't, you know, have that sensation in my brain of a glove full of earwigs. Again, that's a weird sentence. That feels like the
a ve-
title of something. I need to write it down quick. A glove full of earwigs.
um, yes, that is a very weird sentence, and also just a bit of trivia for you, because you had mentioned that wasps are good at taking care of pests and such.
Hmm,
Um, if I remember the detail correct, for every bug, there is a wasp to deal with said bug.
quite possibly, yeah. I mean, there's a
Uh,
lot of different kinds of wasps.
yes, and most of the wasps have a single purpose outside of, being a prick to humans, but their single purpose is generally to screw with a single like bug species. Like they're the counter to
I
make sure
guess.
that they aren't overpopulating or what have you, if I remember what I read correctly. So a random bit of trivia in return for your trivia before we started recording about the gift horse in the mouth. Um,
You're welcome.
as well, I do want to ask this just because you mentioned, planting flowers and everything. What I don't know if flowers in the sense of your rotation is a seasonal choice. Like every year, you're like, oh, I'm gonna do this or this or this. But like, what flower is your go-to flower? I That's a weird question to
Oh,
ask and phrase it that way.
no.
However, I think you know what I'm trying to ask.
That's a lovely question, not one I was expecting to be asked. I do joke that whatever. is flowering right now is my favourite flower, because I'll go out there and go, oh, this one's flowering finally, I love this one. And that's kind of one of the joys, that there is always something new flowering. I think probably like my top flower is mountain cornflower. It's a really cool kind of spiky blue flower, and the bud it comes out of looks like a little hatched basket. It's just like every part of it is really nice, and the leaves are kind of white and fuzzy. So it's just a really beautiful flower, and it comes out, I think, at the end of May, which is still quite early in the UK for flowers. So it's always really welcome as well. It's really this sort of giant spiky blue thing that appears, and I've grown it in every garden I've ever had.
Thank you for that. I'm always so. Then one of the things is when people, they say their hobbies or what have you. I always like to ask questions like that. Because it's always interesting, right? Like, someone watches birds, they're gonna have a favorite bird, and it's always going to be interesting and hear their interest in the bird. And as yeah, so I'm glad I caught you off guard with asking about the flower. And when you were explaining it, I looked it up, and that is that's an interesting flower. Like, you're right, like
It
how it
is.
how it comes out and like looks. And the violet, I think, is the appropriate term for the purple that is probably.
I
But no, thank you
guess.
for sharing that. It's a nice, interesting flower, and I'm, like I said, I'm always happy to hear what people's favorite thing from a hobby is, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, Sally, I do know that it's evening for you, and I don't want to
Mm.
steal too much more of your time. However, I am hoping that before I let you go, that you are okay with me hitting you with some nonsensical lightning round questions.
Uh-oh, it's time to test whether I really am as silly as I've made out myself to be.
Yes, you I say this in jest, of course. You made this song and dance about how you were good at,
Yeah.
improvising and giving in to the silliness and being loose about these things. So I think if you're okay with it, this would be the perfect test for that. Not that I set out to try and test you on it, however, circumstances have provided.
Yeah, I've done it to myself, haven't I?
You really did. You kind of did talk a
I
big
set
game.
myself
So,
up for this, didn't I? Oh well. All right.
um, now, before we do get into, I do want to remind you that these are just lighthearted, nonsensical, and a little bit random. So, by all
Okay.
means, no judgment. You can answer them however you see fit. And most of them, I'm gonna say you don't have to elaborate. You can just say
Okay.
it and move on if that's how you choose to go.
Okay. I'm just getting more and more nervous.
Well, with that in mind, that I'm gonna try and be a little mean. I apologize. So, Sally, which video game character do you think is most likely to put orange juice over their cereal?
I can immediately think of absolutely no characters whatsoever. Uh, oh, you can edit these pauses out, right?
Part of the fun is not, to be quite
I
honest.
don't. I have had a complete brain blank. Oh, Herman Merman from Locomotive, which not very many people have played, but it's an incredible game. But Herman Merman in that as we say in the UK, bit of a prat.
Oh, thank you. Fantastic name as well. So,
Mm,
the pause, the wait was worth it in that mind, in my mind for
no
that.
pressure.
Um, yeah, no pressure, no pressure. Um, if Mario was a jelly bean, what flavor do you think he would be? And do you think he'd be a real flavor or one of those trick flavors that's actually gross to like surprise you?
Oh, interesting. My gut instinct is cola flavored, and I don't know why. I just think that would definitely be, yeah, and he would definitely be a real flavor as well. I feel very strongly about this, clearly.
I thank you for that. I would like to say that uh, cola would be a pleasant surprise if I were to eat a jelly bean that said it was Mario flavor. So thank you. That's a shocker, but a pleasant one at that.
Okay.
Now, Sally, I'm gonna hit you with the final one.
Mm-mm.
Um, and I'm pretty sure certain this will land. I'm pretty sure these exist in the UK. However, if they don't, we'll try a different
Ooh.
one. But which video game character do you think takes the term yard sale or garage sale literally?
So yeah, we tend to call them car boot sales generally because we use the car boot to sell stuff. But yeah, we are aware of the concept of yard sales and garage sales. We even say it weird, garage. Um, I mean, I've mentioned it before. Guybrush Threepwood would take anything that's not nailed down, and that's an adventure game protagonist thing. But I think particularly him. I think yeah, if you were in the yard doing a yard sale, he'd take the yard definitely.
So,
Sorry, Guybrush.
Sally, so Sally, thank you for that. That was the lightning round. You survived it. I appreciate you bravely walking into it as I sprung it on you. Um, but as I said, I didn't, that's kind of like the wrap up or the lights are going on. So with that in mind, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. However, if there was anything else you did want to discuss, a cool game, what else you're doing, something you just feel more people should be aware of, by all means, the floor is yours. As well, please let everyone know where they can find more information about you, which I'll also include in the episode description.
Ah, brilliant. Generally, you can find me by Googling my name, Sally Beaumont, Beaumont. That's my website.com. And you can find me on Blue Sky and Instagram and so on. I have a YouTube channel as well, which I'm currently filling up with lots of behind the scenes stuff. So if you want to see what it was like recording on Old Skies, I have plenty of those, and lots of my other adventure game roles as well. There seems to be a real growing interest in the work of voice actors and how you kind of get there and do all these sorts of, particularly the character voices. It's always fun seeing a weird character voice come out of somebody that you're not expecting. But I like to share those a lot. What else? I think I've already kind of banged my drum a fair amount for adventure games as kind of, the ideal evening short entertainment thing, and I think that's something that I will always bang on about. But there is a real, I call it the second golden age of adventure games, just because there are so many interesting stories happening. And I think a lot of people think that they're mainly kind of comedy games or very kind of like slightly shallow ideas, but there's some really fascinating stuff going on with the storytelling, with the art, the style. A lot of them are pushing engines like Adventure Game Studio to the absolute limit to do really, really interesting things, and it really is worth just dipping your toe, particularly as there's so many demos out there. You can just have an evening of demos, which I do periodically, just to kind of feel what's going on in the industry. Yeah, I think that a lot of people were put off by some of the quirks, shall we say, from the games in the 90s, and I love those, but also I think the stuff that's coming out now is really interesting. And there's all sorts of cool games that have come out literally this year. Rosewater is great, Old Skies is great, Locomotive is great. That's a really big comedy game. Um, uh, there's so many. I'm sorry if I didn't say your game name because, as I've said before, my memory is terrible. Um, but yeah, it is really worth exploring all the different games that are being made and being made by all sorts of really interesting people. Uh, the industry is kind of opening itself up to really interesting experiences, different people's perspectives, and I really enjoy that. I enjoy characters that I've never met before, stories that I hadn't thought about. It's a really exciting time in adventure games. and it deserves a lot more attention than it usually gets.
So thank you for those call outs at the end there. I'm always happy to hear what people are enjoying inside of the word um inside of that sphere. I'll use that. It's probably the wrong word here, but I'm always happy to hear, like, when fans of a genre, that was the word, fans of a genre are, wanting to throw out other games from the genre, because it's, that's how you learn, that's how you help
Mm.
spread the word and what have you. So thank you so much for that as well. I will make sure those links are in your um the links to your where to find you are in the episode description. That way everyone can easily click through and find you. And I did want to note that i I think it's interesting to have on the background, like in YouTube, have like in the background's the wrong word, but like be sharing the behind the scenes. Words are
Mm.
escaping me today, but sharing the behind the scenes, because it's because you're right. Like when I listened to your demo reel, for example, you had a different voice for all of them. At least to me,
Mm.
you did, and it's interesting to be able to look at like the behind the scenes for someone and see how those voices might change or how they can come out or what have you, like the thought process behind it, or
Yeah.
in behind the scenes in general is what I'm speaking to in this. So that's interesting that you're putting that out there, so thank you. That's also an important thing I think people should take a look at, like you said, if they were interested in voice acting, because that'll give more insight into the process, into the craft, into the everything surrounding it.
Yeah, I hope so. I don't want to hold myself up as like I'm the ultimate example of voice acting. I can only share the stuff that I do and the way that I work. But it can be really helpful if you're new to watch videos of other people working and see how directors speak to them and see, the questions that voice actors are asking and what they're doing with the line, if they're doing lots of different takes and so on. You can learn so much. And I personally, I watch other voice actors behind the scenes stuff, and I get a heck of a lot from that. And that was part of why I wanted to start sharing it myself. Um, yeah, and it is kind of fun. It's a really fun job, and I think there's a lot more attention on voice acting, the quality of voice acting in games, full stop, but in adventure games particularly, has been extraordinary. I think voice acting in the past, people have been a bit like, oh, it can be a bit dodgy, but I think that's very old hat. And the way that voice acting is, I think a lot of games absolutely rival Hollywood. All of those things. The performances are incredible under some very difficult circumstances sometimes. And again, that's another reason to share the behind the scenes stuff, is to show what a limited environment we're in and what limited information we have to do our job, and that we still somehow do it. But yeah, the realization that the voice acting is super important to the storytelling, to the player experience. I think there's been more attention on that lately, and I love it. I love that people are seeing the creative input that we have into the emotional experience that players have when they play. And I think that's a really important element, the emotional connection. Yeah, it's you can tell it's a really interesting topic, and I will talk about it for hours if given the opportunity. But yeah, if you want to see more, you can go and look at YouTube. There's lots of conversations from behind the scenes on Old Skies, where I explain how complicated it is to do a line that is about time travel. And what exactly would that feel like to do that? We have a discussion about how on earth we would put that into a line. It's really cool.
So again, Sally, thank you so much, because yes, yes, I wonderful, wonderful things to share, and for encouragement as well. You have said a lot of things as we have spoken today that are um, very. I'm struggling for the right word, and I apologize, but they have been very informative, very um, poignant. Thank you
Oh.
for everything you've said. I've just appreciated so much of the things you have said. So much of it has caught me off guard. Um, so I
Uh,
appreciate the insights, the approach for things. Just thank you so much.
Oh, no, absolutely my pleasure. As you can tell, I absolutely adore my work and I think about it a lot, and I've worked really hard on it and to get where I am. And it's just really nice to chat about it and just generally chat about games as well, because it's a really exciting time.
Yes, yes, it is. And so just thank you for coming and sharing your passion and talking about it with me.
Oh, my pleasure. Really, my pleasure.
However, Sally, if there wasn't anything else, I will shut up and I will let you get on with your evening.
Thank you. The garden is calling.
Thanks again to Sally for making time to have this conversation with me, and thank you for joining us on the Red Tunic podcast, as well as a special thanks to Ron Jenkins for the use of music from the title track from Road Steep. And be sure to check out the episode description for links to socials, websites, and other means that will allow you to learn more about or support Sally and the podcast. And while you're doing that, share, like, follow, whatever else you think makes the algorithm work. Thanks, till next time.